Hello, everyone. The book that I chose to read was called Operators and Things. It's a memoir by Barbara O'Brien, originally written in 1958, and it details what it was like for her to go through a schizophrenic split and actually come out of that miraculously. So, some of my preconceptions about the disorder was that it is so uh, debilitating and obvious and sort of like visible. And I think in a lot of cases it is, but as we'll see through her story, it's not always like that. And, I think we oftentimes come across, unfortunately, situations where you see homeless people who are suffering from hallucinations or delusions, and it's very like obvious and saddening, and you can see it very much. And in her case, she was traveling around the country. She was keeping correspondence with her family. No one suspected that she was having this psychological disorder. So basically, what had happened is she woke up in the middle of the night and saw three figures at the end of her bed, and they were called operators. They described to her that in the world there were only two kinds of beings, operators and things. And things were just normal humans, and operators walked around and they looked like humans, but they were actually more powerful beings. They controlled humans, they could control their intentions, they could use them for whatever they wanted, they could read their mind. And basically, they said that they were going to conduct an experiment on her, and she was going to be revealed the world of the operators, and no one else would know or see them or hear them, and she couldn't tell anyone or else she would be killed. So they had very little empathy for her. They didn't really care about humans. It was very clear that this experiment would go on until they saw that she wasn't necessary anymore. So she basically goes on this 6-month journey following what they tell her to do. She tries to escape them at points and she can't. She was working in a company. She was a businesswoman, and it was a very toxic environment, and there were a lot of manipulative people who sort of worked their way up in the ranks, and she came to understand them as operators. And she details later she thinks that that's where she got the idea of these operators in her subconscious to have this psychological split in that way. And eventually her subconscious sort of drives her out of it, where these operators tell her that she's going to have a trial and that she needs to go to a church and tell this minister everything about the operators, and then he will decide on her trial. And he ends up, of course, sending her to a hospital, and eventually she gets help. But they reject her from a psych ward. She doesn't get the real treatment she needs, and she ends up in a psychoanalyst's office who isn't necessarily supposed to treat schizophrenia. But she, after her fourth session with him, no longer has the operators in her brain at all. And so then we get to the next part of the book where she's sort of regaining her cognitive abilities and skills, and she's no longer suffering from her hallucinations and her delusions, but she's suffering from a lot of the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. She has a hard time thinking, speaking. She can't even read. She can hardly watch a movie and follow the plot. She describes her brain as this dry beach where there's like no thoughts or anything. Then eventually she gets these slow waves that crash over the beach and they leave a thought. Then she develops this something, which is sort of an intuition that she has, but she still has an anchor in her, is what she describes it as, where it's sort of that flat emotional, no emotion, the flat affect. Eventually she gets her reasoning machine back, where all of those parts kind of work together again, and she's able to basically exist in society normally again. She's no longer suffering from schizophrenia. It's really quite amazing to see that transition. So just some of the preconceptions that I, had challenged while reading this book really were like just the fact that she was such a successful businesswoman and she was able to leave without raising any heads. She kept correspondence with her family and friends while she was, roaming the country, really not in control of herself. But no one knew that she was going through this. And I think that that's something that I had never really heard of or thought could happen. I think I understand now really that schizophrenia can be anywhere and it's not so obvious like I think a lot of us might think it is. But this was a really great book. I would recommend it to anyone. And thank you for listening.